Hello, world. It's John Pinto, your roving realtor, bon vivant, and I am here with Ted Stephanos, one of my people. One of my people. Got a lot of Greek blood in me from HomeGuard NHD. Is that correct, Ted?
That's correct. Yep.
And what does NHD mean? Please impart that to the audience.
It's natural hazard disclosure, which is unique to California. We have no other state has natural hazard disclosures in their as part of requirements with real estate transactions. So it's unique to California.
Very good. And we have Rafael Betances. And Rafael, please tell us your role at HomeGuard.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in. I'm Rafael Betances, your territory manager for the North Bay area. We do termite home and roof inspections as well as NHD reports.
Very good. And home warranty.
And home warranty as well, that's correct. There you go. Thank you for keeping me in check there, John.
Can I get a job down there? So Ted, rather than getting into the weeds on the history of natural hazard disclosure and all that, which we could cover at some point in time, let's go directly to the crisis and environmental crisis du jour, the California wildfires. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I looked at the map for wildfires for the entire West Coast, and it was just pretty onerous, pretty nasty. So let's dive into the wildfire part of the natural hazard disclosure. What can you tell us about that?
Well, one question that I get quite often is, will the maps be changing? And the answer is probably not, because most of these fires that have occurred are already occurring in areas that are state responsibility areas, which are more rural, unincorporated county areas, or in areas that are more LRA, which is the local responsibility area, very high fire hazard severity zones. So those are more the higher urban areas. But most of the fires that have been occurring, 400 plus in the state of California, are occurring in areas that are already mapped as a wildland fire hazard area.
Okay,
So
now is there one category of wildfire area, or are there several categories of wildfire in your maps?
Well, with the disclosure we do, there's mainly two categories. You have the state responsibility areas, and then you have the very high fire hazard severity zones. So those are the main two areas that we disclose in the NHD reports. But within that, you're either in or out, because the natural hazard disclosure statement, which has the yes, no check boxes, it's either a yes or no. So they don't differentiate like low, moderate, high, very high, or high, or very high, or extreme, or things like that. Now,
Right.
there are a lot of fire maps that we use on a local level, local meaning adopted by cities and counties. So like County of San Diego, for example, has very detailed fire maps that do have like 6 different gradations of fire zones, from
Right.
low to moderate to high to extreme, which we disclosed in our NHD reports as well. But it's not statutory, it's more the local level uh, non-statutory disclosures.
Please impart to me and the audience the difference between those two categories of fire hazard zones that you referenced.
Yeah, well, one is mandatory, okay, meaning that on the statutory NHD statement, the natural hazard disclosure statement, you have the very high fire hazard severity zones and the state responsibility areas. Now, those are required for every real estate transaction in California, whether it's a mobile home or condo or vacant land or single family home or whatever. Those are required to disclose. Now, then there's the gray area, the local disclosures, things that are adopted by cities and counties that there's no civil code saying that that information has to be disclosed. But
Okay, so hold that thought for a minute. So with the two areas of disclosures, not the local disclosures, is there any practical implication or cautionary tale that a consumer buying a house needs to understand in terms of what the signals are from those two categories of disclosure?
Well, you mean aside from risk?
No, I mean exactly risk.
Oh, okay.
Exactly risk.
I thought you meant that was like obvious, of course, right?
Yeah, it's not. It's. I don't
Um,
think it's obvious.
well,
I think
really,
people need to know the difference.
I guess I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, it's second nature. It's obvious to me. Uh, okay, yes, risk. That's the key thing, but there's also the maintenance issue. So if you're living in a very high fire hazard severity zone, you are required by the state fire marshal to maintain brush clearance, like no overhanging limbs on over your home, spark arresters on chimneys. You have to have any new construction for your roof has to be a Class A roof, meaning fire protective type roofing. So there is cost involved, especially with the brush clearance. Now, the problem is that does that really get enforced? And it's clearly it doesn't, because there are homes you can drive in the Oakland Hills, areas that, for example, didn't burn in the 1991 firestorm, that are clearly, I mean, you still have homes that are, surrounded by eucalyptus and brush, and it's very dense vegetation in those areas. So obviously, that there's a lack of compliance, I think, really, because homes don't have that defensible space around them that are living in these wildfire areas.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand for my own edification. One more time, repeat. What's the title of those two different fire zones that you
Okay,
referenced?
so these are on this natural hazard disclosure statement, which has the yes no check boxes and signature
Yes.
page. So that has to be disclosed by the seller through the realtor for every real estate transaction. So it's called the very high fire hazard severity zones
Mhm.
and the wildland urban. So let me look at the exact terminology, because I call it SRA, meaning state responsibility areas. But
Yeah.
on the actual natural hazard disclosure statement, it's a very high fire hazard severity zone. That's one. And then the other one is a wildland area that may contain substantial forest fire risk and hazards. What that means is a wildland area are the state areas. So those are the unincorporated county rural areas. So like Boulder Creek, Felton, all those areas that sustained tremendous damage last month,
Yeah,
those
Big Basin
areas
State
are
Park.
in a wildland.
Okay, I understand. So the takeaway is whether it's in one or it's in the other, if you're a home buyer buying in either disclosed area, you've got to be hyper vigilant and think about your downside risk in buying in those areas, either one, correct?
Yeah, and one of the other differences between the two, the very high fire hazard zones are going to be in urbanized areas, so densely populated areas. So the response time could be much quicker. The state responsibility areas, the response time might be hours. I mean, it really depends how rural your property is.
That's
Also, you're
meaningful.
not going to have, I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's meaningful. I
Yeah.
never thought about it that way. For instance, so Lake Berryessa, who knows when they're going to get to you? Berkeley Hills, maybe they'll get to you a little quicker.
Well, Berkeley Hills would be in a very high fire hazard severity zone because that's an urban,
Yeah.
that's an urban area. Now, there are state responsibility areas like Boulder Creek and so forth that have volunteer fire departments as well. So they might have a very quick response time. But if you're way up on Mount Hamilton, like you're saying, or Berryessa, yeah, it could be a while. Plus, there's no fire suppression type hydrants or equipment might be available, so they might be showing up with backhoes and shovels, no water. So that's an issue as well.
Okay, so the takeaway on this is there is a difference. And the difference is in mitigation if there's an event. Is that correct?
Yeah, Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good way to put it. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So
There's different factors. I mean, a lot of, yeah, exactly. Response time is a big issue, of course.
good, good. Well, I never really thought about it that way. I just figured you're in a fire zone or you're not. It's very binary, but it's not necessarily very binary because if the more remote you are, possibly the more at risk with the less protections you have. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's true. Um, Now that doesn't get disclosed in the NHD report, like response times, things like that. We don't
Right.
provide that information, that level, but that is something that the homeowner or the buyer can do as well. They can
Right.
do that research. They can contact their local CAL FIRE station if they're in a remote area to see what response times would likely be.
Okay. So
Hey
where
Ted,
this
do you
brings,
recommend?
yeah,
Sorry to cut you off, Don. Do you recommend that anybody getting an NHD finds this details out? Not before, but if they're gonna receive an NHD, they should probably look for this response times and all the different details.
You mean if
How
they're in
important
one
is
of these
that?
fire zones? If it was me, I would. I mean, everybody is a little bit different. Every transaction is unique. So I think it's a good idea to know those things. I mean, you could do nonstop preventative measures when it comes to living in California, because aside from
Right.
earthquakes, we have all kinds of other natural hazard disasters that you would, if you're living up in a hillside area, fire's not your only issue. You're talking
Right.
landslides, you're talking faults, you're talking
Well,
expansion.
the rate 2020 is going. I think we might have zombies next week.
Yeah, we still have a couple months to go.
that's right. Ted, are you firstborn by any chance?
Firstborn American.
No, firstborn. Do you have siblings?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one brother, a couple years older.
Oh, okay. Well, you're lucky then, because I'm the oldest of four. And per Raphael's remark, I think the Napa River is going to turn red with blood, and all firstborn are going to be taken, and we're going to have a locust swarm this year. What do you think? We're gonna have to put that on. We're gonna have to put that on your disclosure.
Yeah, we'll have to make an addendum to the report, I think, for 2020.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. So what I think I'm gonna do is, I mean, we could go down several huge rabbit holes on this issue, but I think we'll save that for another video. But what the takeaway that I'm getting from the information that you have just imparted is that it's not binary. It's not you're in a fire zone and you're not, or you're not in a fire zone. It depends on which fire zone you're in terms of how much you could depend on infrastructure to rescue you and your house if you have an incident. Is that correct?
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Oh, okay, good, good,
Yeah,
good.
and one other thing to add too is that without having these hazards, we wouldn't have this disclosure. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
the very high fire zones were a direct result of the Oakland Hills firestorm. So that's what passed the law to say, start disclosing these zones in a very high fire zone, very high fire hazard severity zone. So down the road, there is some upcoming legislation about defensible spacing. I think that's Senate Bill 190. That's supposed to
fire hardening, fire
yeah,
hardening.
that's Assembly Bill 38 that's passed, that's taking effect next year about the fire hardening disclosure. So essentially the seller will need to disclose to the buyer information about fire hardening if the home is built before 2020. So, and then there's some subsequent disclosures after that that take effect in 2025 about low cost retrofits and things like that. So, our government is doing what they can to try and protect people living in these areas because, 50, 60 years ago, we just didn't have homes that were built in these, what are called like wildland urban interface areas. And now we have 20 more million people that are living in these areas that are, that we didn't live in before. So maybe not 20 million, but I know our population has doubled
Plenty.
in the past, 30 years? And a lot of that population is spread into these areas that, like Fountain Grove in Santa Rosa, right? That area burned all the way from Calistoga to Santa Rosa, that area burned in the 1960s in the exact same manner, with a high wind event that blew the fire from east to west. But only a few people passed away, and not many properties were lost because nobody lived there, you know?
There you go. There you go. Very good. Okay, so we'll wrap this up. So again, what I'm going to emphasize and feel confident that we're going to revisit this subject and drill down and go down that rabbit hole of not all fire areas are the same in an upcoming video. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next video.